Hello, it's me, Logan Albright, back here with another lovely book review for your viewing pleasure. Today's book, Dubliners by James Joyce. I have here the Macmillan Library pocket hardcover edition. It's a lovely blue cloth bound edition that is small enough to fit. Here's the blue cloth, see that? Small enough to fit in your pocket, carry around with you, which I felt very appropriate for a book like Dubliners. I'm going to Ireland in the fall, and I wanted to bone up on my James Joyce. I wanted to bone up on my Irish literature. I'm also reading some William Butler Yeats, so I'm doing a little bit of a unit study on Ireland, and I'm excited about it. But let's talk about Dubliners. Now, James Joyce. I've read some Joyce in the past. I read Ulysses a couple years ago, and I didn't really care for it. It's very difficult in parts and very strange. And then I started reading Finnegan's Wake about a year ago, and that's completely incomprehensible. I'm about 100 pages in, and I'm going to keep reading it and plow through and get to the end. And I'll do a video about that as well, but it's a very, very bizarre book, written in extremely strange English, and many would say just unreadable entirely. But Dubliners is a different animal. Dubliners was Joyce's first published work. It is our first published book anyway, and it's a collection of 15 short stories all about the city of Dublin. And it was written in the early 20th century. I think it was published in 1914, and it deals with right around the turn of the century time period in Dublin, Ireland. Now, the short stories are more or less arranged from the point of view of youthful protagonists, children experiencing the city, to older, mature people, and then to old people entirely. And there's this kind of nice little progression where it starts with children and goes to older and older people until you get a kind of an old man or old woman's perspective on the whole thing. Now, the stories are very slice of life. There's not a lot of action that happens. There's sort of a modernist, realist style to these stories. Like I said, not much action, just ordinary happenings in a day in the life of people in Dublin. And this is similar to Ulysses, which takes place over the course of a single day, also in the city of Dublin. Joyce, interestingly, actually left Dublin early in the 20th century, spent most of the rest of his life in France and other European countries, and didn't come back. So I tend to think of him as this great Irish writer who spent all of his time wandering around the streets of Dublin and other Irish cities, but actually he spent very little time in Ireland. And even though he wrote about Ireland for the rest of his life, he was mostly away from it. And I guess it's not that hard to see why. He seems to have somewhat of a contemptuous view of Dublin. If not contemptuous, then certainly not positive. These stories portray a city that is a little bit bleak, a little bit hopeless, desperately poor. Not a lot of good things going on, at least from his point of view. Now, Joyce had sort of a negative relationship with the Catholic Church. He had a little bit of contempt for the Irish nationalist movement, and I think he felt, from what I've read, he felt that Dublin was really in a bad spot and was not really worthy of the name city. There's a continual theme throughout these stories of paralysis, of people being stuck in the circumstances that they started out in, not being able to change, not being able to get out of them, just kind of being trapped in one place. I think that's something you see in most, if not all, of the stories. There's been a lot of critical analysis of this work, and it's considered to be some of the greatest short stories in the English language. I think that the critics overdo it a little bit. I think they overread the symbolism. Some of the themes they pull out, I think, are a stretch, we'll say. But there are certainly a little bit of symbols and a little bit of themes that run through. There are digs at the Catholic Church. There's digs at the nationalists. There's digs at just people who are unable to change or unwilling to change their situation. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of poverty, a lot of misery, a lot of, it's not, I wouldn't quite say nihilistic, but there's a little bit of that kind of nihilistic bent where what you see a lot of 20th century writing, a lot of Russian writing, a lot of European writing, where they say, oh, you know, life is just bleak and repetitive and boring, and then you die, which I'm not generally a fan of. I tend to like romanticism in my works, so having something that's a little more realist and a little bit more, you know, without there being a big hero or a big plot or a big point to things, a little bit more nihilistic. It's not usually something I go for, but I think these are really well written. I think that Joyce is an excellent writer. He's good at finding exactly the right word to fit his meaning. So I think his sentences are very precisely crafted. And you see that in his later works too, even when he's writing sentences that are almost impossible to understand. He has very deliberately chosen each of his words and put them in the right place. So I think he's very good at that. He's very good at evoking feelings. A lot of these stories to me are just capturing an emotion. And they're not like the common, you know, broad emotions that you think about when you think of emotions. They're very specific emotions. One of my favorite stories is called Arabi, and it's about this girl, or this young boy, adolescent boy, who kind of becomes infatuated with this neighbor girl, and he promises he's going to go to this market bazaar that's on display in the city, and he's going to get her a gift. And so there's that whole capturing of that young infatuation, being fascinated and kind of intimidated by this neighbor girl. Really well done. And then his parents kind of forget that they promised he could go to the bazaar. It gets late. They make him stay doing chores, and eventually he gets to go. But when he arrives, it's basically closed. It's not completely closed. It's just starting to shut down, but all the good stuff is gone. There's only a little bit left, and one by one the lights are going out. And like just this feeling of standing there and watching kind of a missed opportunity and seeing everything close down around you, you can feel what that's like, even if you haven't experienced it yourself. I think that's a very specific emotion, and he does a great job of capturing it. And there's a lot of that throughout these stories. There's a lot of what it's like to be a child. There's a lot of, what it's like to have coming of age. There's a lot of regret, a lot of loneliness. Those type of emotions are in here a lot. So it's not a happy read. It's not a really joyful read, but it's well observed. You really see the specific, physical details of the city and the locations and the surroundings and the people, but you also see the very specific emotional details of what goes on inside someone's head. And it's subtle. It's not, they don't hit you over the head with it. You kind of have to read into the stories a little bit. A lot of times you'll finish a story and you'll think, what was that about? What was the point he was trying to make? And was he even trying to make a point, or was it just something that happened? And I tend to err on the just something that happened side of things. I don't like to overanalyze these kind of stories, but I think he does a great job of pinpointing those kind of everyday feelings that people have and really observing human nature closely, which is what I liked about the book. It's not very long. My edition is about 250 pages in a small edition. The longest story is called The Dead. It's a very famous story. It's the last one in the collection. And in this one, I think it's about 53 pages in this edition. It's been considered a novella, but another story is only 6 pages long, so they vary. I think they tend to get longer as a whole as you go along. The later stories in the collection are a little bit longer and more detailed. But they're all good, and they all kind of highlight different aspects of the human condition and the city of Dublin. It really could be any city. I don't think there's a lot that's particularly Irish in here. There's some of it when they talk about nationalism, and when they talk about the drinking culture and things like that. But for the most part, I think any city in the late 19th, early 20th century could suffer a lot of these same problems. And so you don't have to have been to Ireland or to know a lot about Ireland in order to appreciate it. I want to read Ulysses again. I didn't totally appreciate it the first time I read it, and I think that now that I get a better sense of what Joyce is about and what his style is like, I think I will appreciate it more. But if you want to read Joyce and you've heard that he's good and you're intimidated by him because Ulysses is such a heavy slog and Finnegan's Wake is so incomprehensible, this would be a great jumping off point, a great starting point where you can learn a little bit about what Joyce is all about and why he's so revered as a writer. He also wrote A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, which I haven't read yet, but I do intend to read that at some point, so I'll let you know what I think of that when I read it. But that's what I thought of Dubliners. I quite enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to my trip to Ireland in the fall, and hopefully I'll get immersed in some more classic Irish literature before then. Thank you guys so much for watching. I've been Logan Albright. Please like and subscribe to this video channel, and you can click the little bell there to get notifications of future videos I post. If you'd like to leave a comment in the comments section, tell me what you think of James Joyce or Dubliners in particular, or other great Irish authors I should read. Please let me know. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.